little bit about dimension?
This meeting is being recorded.
Say again? Sorry, I had a notice pop up that was rather loud.
Yeah, that's Garrett. Do you know anything about these dimensions or some dimensions? I guess you're technical, so you might know.
A little. His interpretation of them was interesting read. Not definitely a different way I've heard fifth, sixth, and seventh described. First through fourth is typical, so nothing surprising there.
Oh, wonderful.
It'll be interesting to see how he explains it.
Okay, I see Will just arrived, and Eleanor, and Rose, and Tony. Rose, I don't think I spoke to you before.
Hi, Liz. Yes, we talked before, a few months ago.
Oh, wonderful. And what interests you about tonight's topic?
I love the scientific aspect of it. I love science, and I love the scientific aspect of it. So I'm very curious to see what Garrett gonna say.
Oh, that's great. And for everybody in the chat, I put Garrett's essay if you'd like to read it quickly. Is there anyone else that'd like to introduce themselves?
Don't be shy. We'd love to hear from you all.
Well, I'll speak if no one else will. Hello, I'm Will, Sunny Coast, Queensland, Australia, part of the British colony. God save the King. It's nearly 9 a.m. here, and I'm pleased to announce that there are no other civilizations have arrived overnight. So you can all sleep well, knowing that in the morning, chances are you won't wake up to find some sort of alien creature on every street corner asking for identification as you walk by. I'm interested in higher dimensions. I guess I've just looked at the blurb then, so I haven't really got my head around what it means in this context. But, you know, given I'm a bit of a one-trick pony with my philosophy that something arose from nothing, or alternatively, it existed infinitely without first cause. I believe this to be beyond human comprehension, and therefore all bets are off. I'm not ruling out perhaps other entities. Is that what you mean, Garrett, by higher dimensions, like other intelligences?
No, that was when we talked about aliens. We talked about the idea of other
Yo,
types.
is my mic working? Y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Joe. And I have to lock down the permissions. I just realized I didn't do that. So
Yeah, don't forget to make us host too.
I did make you guys hosts.
Yes, I guess we're talking other realms, other parallel universes, that sort of thing, is it? I didn't actually read the
Parallel
literature.
universes is one of the dimensions, so we'll get into that. So I'll try to describe it. It's a little bit, tonight is a very, like, I normally focus on practical philosophy. Tonight is a very theoretical, you know, very little practical application in what I'm going to talk about tonight. You've got mail. So I think Joe, you know, if you're a troll, you might want to consider better use of your time. If you need any life coaching, feel free to reach out.
I know Zoom Bomber. Like, I just have an Android, so it just goes off the line, you know.
That's literally Adam as Joe. Like, dude, you're caught.
You know, he was probably a troll. And I think someone removed him, assuming that. Probably a
I
fair
just
bet.
removed him.
Yeah,
No, I
think
didn't. I didn't.
I think that was a good bet, Ellis. So thanks.
So, Will, what is this new photo about here with the bunny rabbit?
I'm not sure. I just thought it was in my pictures library on my computer. So I think it's Alice in Wonderland. I'm thinking, or a sort of a derivative of that, which could relate to other realms, I guess.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to make the argument that that photo you have actually exists in some parallel dimension and some part of the extended many worlds that I think potentially really exist, but potentially don't. I don't know if they really exist, but hypothetically exist. It may hypothetically exist somewhere.
Oh. So, I mean, the philosopher Don Hoffman talks about our ability to navigate our environment as per our evolved senses. So, I find that of interest as well, that perhaps there are, we've just scraped the surface of reality with sight, sound, touch, taste, and the mind is the sixth sense. If you count the mind, so we could just be looking like at a veneer, and we're just interfacing with that. According to Don Hoffman, the philosopher, and he said that theory's actually sent him a little bit crazy. So, I mean, he talks about, like, I think of the example of, say, a red cushion on a couch in another room. Is it red when you're not looking at it? Quite obviously it's not. If it has to be observed before it assumes any properties.
We can
Yeah.
talk about that.
Righto.
Yeah. I would posit that it's still red, and that it's emitting the same wavelengths of light, that if it were observed, that it would be seen that it was red. And so for me, the question of whether or not it's actually red at that moment in time is irrelevant to whether or not it's being observed. But I can explain why the quantum mechanics PhDs seem to try to deny objective reality exists until it's observed. That's probably like a digression, and if people want to go down that path, we can. Because I don't know how much conversation there will be about tonight's topic. We'll see. We can talk about it until people are tired of talking about it, and once they are, we can talk about something else.
Would anyone else like to introduce themselves and say something about tonight's topic or anything on your mind?
Just, well, if no one's going to speak, Garrett, a pity this hadn't come to light last week with the UFO thing, because there's been a huge, have you seen this whistleblower guy from the US military came out, highly credible US ex-military intelligence?
That came out the night that we had the event, and people mentioned the article.
Was it?
Yeah. So
he said they've got hundreds of craft that have been reverse engineered. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't hear that it was hundreds of craft that were reverse engineered, but yeah, interesting.
Look pretty credible.
There are more. Sounds like there were more details released since I last heard. So.
Hey, Garrett, I wanted to thank you for referring me to the book, What's ChatGPT and Why Does It Work? I read that, and very good book. Thank you.
Which book?
What's ChatGPT and Why Does It Work? You referenced that in the last meeting.
Oh, I don't know if I referenced it. Maybe someone else did, because I haven't read that. I did a demo of ChatGPT, and but I don't think I referenced the book, so I don't want to take credit for something I didn't help you on. So, but I appreciate the credit nonetheless. but I don't want to take credit if I didn't actually help you. But hopefully someone did. And, you know, I have a saying, which is if we don't help each other, who's going to help us? So someone in the community helped you, and I'm glad that they did.
Everyone's kind of quiet, Garrett. Do you want to start soon? 7.
Yeah, why not? Like, let's get started. Let me start with the intro. So first of all, I'll introduce myself for people who don't know me. My name's Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor for over 2 decades. Now an entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy, and I'm also the executive director of the Freethinker Institute, which is the organization that brings you tonight's events and this series of events on Tuesday evenings. We're a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. We focus on helping people be the best version of themselves, seek truth, and be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events like this on every Tuesday evening, covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry. And we have weekly members events for people interested in applying practical wisdom into their daily lives, into our daily lives. We have only one rule in the FTI, and that is to remain polite. That keeps the conversation at a non-emotional level, which keeps things, thoughtful. I would encourage everyone, if you hear something that makes you feel like that thing is crazy, start asking questions about why that person believes what they do, including me. You're welcome to ask me why I believe what I do. That way we better understand other people's perspectives that may not make sense to us without asking some questions. It's also a more polite way to better understand something that you disagree with, which is usually better than trying to just jump to the conclusion that it's wrong and trying to tell the person why it's wrong. That doesn't really teach us anything. Much better to do what we call listening to understand in the FTI, which is what I just described. So with that said, I did mention earlier, but we have a bunch of people that have joined since then. So I'm going to mention again that tonight's discussion is almost entirely theoretical as far as I can tell. This was the first philosophical essay that I ever wrote. And so I figured, why not present it? Because we didn't have anything this week and I needed something to present. And so I figured we'll do this one. And I think it did come up tangentially in another conversation, another evening. And so that was probably what made me even remember it. So that said, tonight's conversation will be about higher dimensions. And I'll talk through, what that means. It's kind of like, we observe the world is 3-dimensional. We see things in 3 dimensions. And then you can, imagine like a 2-dimensional object, and a 1-dimensional, like a 1-dimensional object is like a line. A 2-dimensional object is like a plane or a square, like on a piece of paper, but not even a piece of paper thin, but literally not any depth at all. And so I'm going to talk about starting from the 0th dimension, all the way up to dimension 6. And my essay had 7 dimensions. When I was preparing for this discussion, I realized that I think the 6th and 7th dimensions really, or the 5th and 6th dimensions really can be collapsed in our 1 dimension rather than 2 separate dimensions. So we can talk through that and why I did that if anyone is interested. I can be convinced that I'm wrong at any time. So maybe the original 7 was right, but I think actually that there are 6 dimensions that I can conceive of, and they get pretty darn abstract at number 6. And super theoretical. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and hopefully you guys can see my screen. And so pull up the presenter view. Okay. So and let me get my video. Okay. So, and Michael, I'm going to make you a host too, just in case we get Zoom bombed. So let's start with dimension 0. Dimension 0 is basically a point. It doesn't have any like depth or space. It's just the idea or the concept of something either existing or not existing. And the idea is that at the 0 dimension, you either have something that exists or you don't have something that exists. And it's really not more complicated than that. It either exists or it doesn't exist. There's not like a halfway to existence. It just either exists or doesn't exist. And we can argue if you want in the discussion about whether or not things can semi-exist. I would argue that when they're observed, they either exist or don't exist. And so we can talk about that in the discussion. And we do save questions for the end of the presentation by popular demand. And then if people we'll get into the discussion stuff at the end so that it's more fresh in people's mind. So dimension number 1 is a line. So on a line, you either have something that exists or doesn't exist at any point in the line. And the line is infinite length. All of these dimensions are infinite in length. And so the line goes on forever and has any combination of, it has some combination of things that either exist or don't exist at any point in the line. Now, when we get into dimension 2, it's a plane. And so you have an infinite number of lines all in parallel, which have every possible combination of things existing or not existing at different points in the line. And so that's the idea of dimension 2 is it's a plane. And it's, what you'll see as a theme, and the way that I came up with this essay was I took a class in linear algebra and I learned about transforming multidimensional spaces. And so I sort of conceptualized transforming from 3-dimensional space to 4-dimensional space to 5-dimensional space and upward, and trying to abstract what those different spaces were. So I try to use a very logical connection, and the lower dimensions are really simple. So I'm just going to give a little bit more background during them. But basically, I try to use a very logical paradigm where basically you can imagine in this plane, every line on the plane is right next to another line. And so you can imagine that each of those lines are kind of have something in common with each other, but are also a little bit different. And so that's a sort of a concept that I use throughout the essay to help me abstract to the higher level dimensions that we can't readily observe. Because I would argue that we can really only observe 3 dimensions at a single moment in time. We just observe it over time, and so we can conceptualize time. And you'll see, I believe time is the 4th dimension, although Adam said that's not super controversial. In some circles, it's controversial. I would argue that that's quite clear to me. And like, I have a high degree of confidence that time is the 4th dimension, but there are lots of people who will try to argue against that. That said, I'll try to make a good argument that it is today, or tonight. So the 3rd dimension is, now we're going to start to get into things that we observe. It's the entire physical universe, which for those that weren't here on my essay on the origins of the universe, I believe the physical universe is actually infinitely large. And so it's not just the observable universe, that we're just some small corner of a much larger infinite universe. And so just, if you don't believe that, just hypothesize for a moment that it's true, and imagine that the 3rd dimension is an entire, infinitely large physical universe at a moment in time. Time is not, we know that time dilates, and so when we say at a moment in time, it is a little complicated, and I'm going to simplify relativity and just say, imagine that there is a moment in time, and you have to understand that as you travel throughout space, time can dilate a little bit. But I'm not going to get into that nuance until the conversation. But let's just imagine the entire physical universe at a single moment in time. Now imagine movement in that universe. And so, what is, if you take the entire physical universe and you collapse it down to 2 dimensions, and you say, well, what does a parallel version of the entire physical universe throughout all time? And basically, like, let me also say that when we're looking at the dimension 3, we're looking at the entire I'm getting ahead of myself. So we're taking the entire mass energy configuration of the universe at a single moment in time. And then if we say that at the next moment in time, we have a slightly different mass energy configuration of the universe, and at the next moment in time, slightly different than that. And so you can imagine sort of stepping into this, like a movie frame, right, where you have one moment in time, and then the next moment in time, and then the next moment in time. And as time passes, that movie frame changes, and the mass energy of the universe is changing, and things are moving around in the universe. The Earth is rotating around the sun, et cetera, et cetera. So that brings us to the 4th dimension, which I think is quite clearly time. We are, I'm going to argue, at least 4-dimensional, I believe 5-dimensional beings that observe 3 dimensions. And we observe 3 dimensions happening over time. So we have a cognizance of time, we have a sense of time, and I would argue we have a cognizance of the 5th dimension as well, which I'll get into. But basically, if we take time to be infinite, then you can imagine a specific set of events happening over an infinite time range. And there is only one future, there is only one past. And that's really what determinism says, is that there's only one future and there's only one past. And there's only one set of things that can happen. And in 4-dimensional space, determinism is right. And there is only one future, there is only one past, and that is the mass energy configuration of the universe in that future and in that past. However, if we collapse that down, that 4-dimensional space down to 3 dimensions, where up and down is time, and the entire mass energy, or actually where so I like to say, let me actually describe 4 dimensions as time. I like to say, imagine that a plane in 3-dimensional space, like we collapse 3-dimensional space down to 2 dimensions. By the way, let me describe what collapsing down means. It means that we don't lose any information from the higher dimensional space, but we visualize it with a different dimension. And so if we take the entire physical universe and we collapse it down to a plane, it still has 3 dimensions, but we're visualizing it in 2 dimensions to better understand it. And so when we're looking at time as the 4th dimension, it's easier to visualize time as the 4th dimension if we imagine all of 3-dimensional space as a plane. And then we say, well, what does the next moment in time look like? It's a plane parallel to the plane at the moment in time that just passed. And so you can imagine us, because time, so far as we know, and there are people who can test this, but I would argue they're wrong. So far as we know, time only travels in one direction. And so I imagine us as falling through the plane of time. And so this 2-dimensional space is all of 3-dimensional space. When we fall, time is passing. Now, if we collapse down again and all of 3-dimensional spaces align, and a plane is the entire deterministic universe, throughout an infinite amount of time, what is parallel to that? And that's where it becomes parallel dimensions or parallel universes. And this is what's called the many worlds theory in physics. It's actually taken on a lot of clout these days, and is largely defended by a lot of physicists. And so the idea that the fifth dimension is parallel universes might be new so far as I know, but the idea that there are parallel universes is fairly defensible. And when I was a determinist atheist, which, you know, I was in college, although, you know, I kind of believed in free will by the end of college because I learned about Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which is what I used to defend free will. But when I wrote this essay, I was coming at it from a perspective of not having been fully convinced of free will. And so when I wrote about the fifth dimension, it really confused the heck out of me because I was like, how could you know, there's only one future, right? There's only one past. And how can you have all of these parallel universes? And, you know, and so the way that I thought about it is that, and I think it made more sense once I became more in the libertarian free will bandwagon, is that when we're falling down in the proverbial fifth dimension, we are making decisions that decide which parallel universe we're going to observe, which is a little mind-boggling, but sort of has an intuitive sense to it, which is, you know, if I want to eat Cheerios or cornflakes for breakfast, I get to decide which one I want to eat. Now, there are two theoretically parallel universes, one in which I eat Cheerios and one in which I eat cornflakes. I get to decide, do I want Cheerios or cornflakes? My free will determines which one I'm going to decide. That determines which parallel universe I catapult into. And all of us as sentient beings are making all these decisions all the time, which is why, you know, infinity is required for all of the free will decisions being made at any given time. It's a mind-boggling kind of calculation, but it's one that, you know, I think makes intuitive sense. And then if we collapse all of the different, oh, and the other thing that I originally had as a separate dimension I mentioned earlier is that, you know, different laws of physics could create different futures too. And I originally had that as the sixth dimension. Now I think, you know, given how big infinity is, that that the universe we're experiencing might be limited in free will, but on the like the z-axis, which is the up and down axis of this fifth dimension, there could be things so far away in the z-axis that nobody's free will can get us there. And those are, you know, different parallel laws of physics that could exist in different parallel dimensions on the fifth dimension. So that I think is theoretically possible. Now, maybe those are the sixth dimension. We can debate that if people want to in the discussion. I now think that they're probably part of the fifth dimension. Now, the next question is, well, what's the sixth dimension? Everything that we know about has cause and effect. And it's common that determinists say, well, I can't imagine that, you know, something doesn't have a cause and effect, and therefore there's only one possible effect. Well, that's actually just assuming every cause and effect is deterministic. For those of us that believe in libertarian free will, we still believe in everything has a cause and effect, just that it not only always has a deterministic cause and effect, meaning it can have a non-deterministic cause and effect. But I do believe everything is caused, just not that the cause and effect are deterministic. However, the sixth dimension is a level of abstraction that is so abstract that it actually rejects cause and effect. And in parallel to cause and effect, there would be some other principle that operates. And the law of cause and effect is in philosophy called the principle of sufficient reason, which just says that for anything that happens, there is some reason that it happened, not necessarily a deterministic reason. That's not part of the principle of sufficient reason. And this gets very abstract. Again, I don't see any big practical value other than trying to, you know, geek out about it. This is impractical philosophy, which is normally not what I focus on, like I said, but, you know, maybe intellectually interesting for some of us. So a fun fact, if God is a sixth dimensional omnipresent being, and my hypothesis on higher dimensions are correct, the common idea that God will know exactly what you're going to do can actually be true he could actually know exactly what every sentient being is going to do with absolute certainty, even if we make non-deterministic decisions on the fifth dimension. Because if you think about how we, as, if I'm right, 5-dimensional beings can observe 3 dimensions over time, we can get very good predictive models, and someday with physics we may get much better predictive models about deterministic things. We can see lower dimensions with real precision. God, as a 6-dimensional omnipresent being, could actually know what we're going to do, even if we're navigating the 5th dimension through parallel universes. So that's a fun fact that I came up with one day when sort of noodling on this a little bit more. So that said, I would, that's the end of the presentation, a shorter one for tonight. So I would love in the comments for people to say whether or not this was intellectually interesting and fun, and say how many dimensions do you agree with. You can just put a number of dimensions, like I agree with 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I want to kind of set the rules of engagement. So I'm going to stop the screen share in a second, and basically when we're going to take hands raised, where people can go to reactions on the bottom, and you'll raise your hand like I'm raising it now, and you can lower your hand after you're done asking your question. And if you raise your party hat, that means, like I'm doing right now, that means you want to comment on what someone who's speaking said. Keep the comments to 10 or 20 seconds long. When you raise your hand, try to keep it to 1 to 2 minutes long, and focus on just one comment or one question per time that you raise your hand. Am I forgetting anything, Alice?
No, that's great. I think we have 28 people, maybe up to 3 minutes max per comment. And
Yeah, I mean,
remember to
whatever
try
it
to
takes
raise
to
your
get
hand.
whatever it takes to get 1 point or 1 question across, up to 3 minutes is fine. But just try to
Okay,
stick to one comment or question at a time, and then after you've asked your question or made your comment, you can drop your hand and raise it again immediately.
Oh, and I was also going to say, raising hands is good, but the party hat is meant to join in on a conversation to make everything more conversational. So we'll use it in that way. Thank you.
Great. So Michael, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think it's reasonable to think of it this way? If you imagine a decision tree, every level of a decision tree is one dimension. So as you go down on the decision tree from the root, which is on the top in this case, you are going to the next dimension based on the decision that you make. So I'm not quite decided. In fact, I sort of lean towards a deterministic world. Yet, although we make decisions, we are moving from one dimension to the next based on our decision. And I haven't tried to look at this mathematically, but I'm thinking perhaps there may be a reasonable way of looking at it. Just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do think it's I did sort of try to do it with a decision tree, but what I did is like an abstractor decision tree rather than a human decision. Because a one-dimensional thing isn't a physical thing. It doesn't physically exist one dimension, nor does 2 dimensions, nor does 0 dimensions. They don't physically exist. The only things that physically exist are 3-dimensional things. And so you kind of have to be a little level more abstract than decision trees. The time that I think that the decision tree makes sense, which you also described, which is there is a decision tree, I think, at a moment in time where we make a decision of what to do or what not to do. And when we make a decision to do something or to not do something, I agree with you that we travel through a multidimensional, parallel universe. But what I would argue is that which parallel universe we're going to travel to is non-deterministic, meaning that even the laws of physics themselves can't figure out which one we're going to travel into. And I have a pretty good argument for that if you want to read my essay on free will. That makes a pretty good logical argument. And I also have an essay on determinism, which I think makes a pretty good logical argument that determinism has been all but completely disproven by modern science. The only thing left is superdeterminism. And that's pretty hard to swallow because it basically says that subatomic particles are determined by mass energy further away than outer space. And given the inverse law fields, given the inverse Fields law, square Fields law, generally the closest things are the ones that are the most influential physically in all the cases we're aware of. So, yeah, that's kind of, where I would, and again, I don't mean to digress on free will, although we can if people want to, because I don't know how, we don't have a lot of hands up. Normally we have a lot more by now, so we may not have a long conversation. I do want to address DLJ's comment. As far as defining dimensions, that's essentially what I tried to do in the presentation. DLJ is, I think each dimension needs to be defined independently. And what I tried to do is define what each dimension was about. And so that was what I tried to do. And Kafui mentioned 11 dimensions according to string theory. If you read the logical explanation of those dimensions, they're really not very intuitive, is my polite way of putting it. And I don't think they're super defensible. And there's been a lot of valid criticisms on string theory of late. And I was never a fan of it. This was my alternative hypothesis on higher dimensions. That said, I want to let Adam go. So go ahead, Adam.
So for my comments centered more around the fourth and fifth dimensional, as you've proposed it, I will say I've never heard someone propose that we are fifth dimensional beings. That was an interesting take, and I can see the logical sense behind it, assuming the prepositions you're talking about are correct. I would say, though, with the assertion that time is just linear and it cannot be altered anyway, I would say there are caveats to that. We've determined that gravity or that mass can warp space-time, and that time does flow at a different rate around supermassive objects versus empty space. So I would say it's less like a fall and more like a river. It has a certain flow, a certain speed that you're traveling down that river. And if you can negate that speed for your own momentum, you can either travel slower through the river, or in some cases, compared to an object not traveling at your speed, actually reverse your course up the river and be at two separate places at the equivalent time frame. That makes any sense. So that is something I would think might be an interesting thing to determine once we have a little more technological advancement, because obviously right now we can't get at high enough speeds to even come close to that. That would take at least a 10th C of momentum, but we don't have that. But still an interesting concept.
I absolutely love your description of rather than a fall, it's more like a flow of a river, because if I understood you right, it was that, rivers have faster areas that flow and then they have ebbs, and, who knows, maybe they even have some that go backwards, although I don't think so. But I think that there is an arrow of time and everything goes in one direction. But I do think that things can dilate. And we have very good evidence that things dilate in time based on subatomic clocks traveling in planes and having time pass at a different rate based on those planes flying. So we have actually observed time travel at, or time flow at a different pace. So I think your description was actually better than mine. So thank you for that. I always appreciate someone that can improve on what I said. And so thank you for that. Great comment.
Not a problem. Feel free to use it going forward if you'd like. do
I
not.
will. I'll try to add it to the essay and give Adam Butler credit for it. I like to give people credit where it's due because there's not enough of that in the world. So, Mike, you have your hand up. Mike Soren.
I think as you said that time is, we do see things that violate our concept of time, but we're basically driven by our five senses or seven senses, whatever we decide. We don't think of more of 12 dimensions. However, the world of physics thinks of 12 dimensions. And we do know that there's relativistic effects, there's entanglement, and there's quantum tunneling, where things appear to appear on the other side of a barrier that shouldn't happen. And that's the devices built that use that fact. Now, physicists have said that time is just a mathematical artifact that prevents everything from occurring at one time. And there is some truth to that. And there's some truth to Descartes' how do we know we're not a brain in a jar and we're observing things based on our senses. And it may not be reality, but when we go through life, we have a subjective reality that we're bound to. That illusion of causality is one that we have to live to. If you mathematically taking the decision tree thing that that Michael, the other Michael, presented earlier, when you do polynomial or multiple regression, you are essentially each variable is another dimension, and you have say 15 things that something is dependent on, and you find the coefficients, and that has a mathematical structure of dimensions. So that is there. Now, in our world, X, Y, Z, and T have another property called orthogonality. And that is that X, Y, and Z are perpendicular to each other. And T in its own way is perpendicular to all three of those. Now, in 12 dimension, you can't really assign meaning in the way we do to the other dimensions and say one of them is this. Our sensations, our sense world doesn't give them that kind of meaning. So they're useful in solving particular problems like how quarks and bosons are put together to make electrons. But that's not really the same kind of reality that we see when we're walking across a river. So that adds a level of complexity. I believe there are more 12 dimensions. When they come up with a model with 25 dimensions, other scientists have been able to reduce them to the 12. There are probably basically 12 dimensions, but they don't necessarily have the physical meaning that we can assign. So I yield the balance of my time, as they say.
You might have been over time, Mike, but yeah, so when you say that things violate the concept of time, what's an example of that?
Quantum entanglement violates the speed of light, and there are devices that that you can build, like when they encrypt something in a satellite. There is a device that you buy that sends the key up into that cryptographic key up to the satellite before the actual signal gets there.
Right, the limitation of the speed of light is that physical objects can't travel faster than the speed of light. In the case of quantum entanglement, it's only potentially information at most, not physical quantities traveling faster than the speed of light. And neither one of them violate the concept of time moving in an arrow. Kafui, do you want to go next? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think what Mikey says, so example of what violates the speed of time is photons, right? Photons travel at the speed of light. So in photons world, there's no time. They are they are instantaneous. There's no future, present, and past are all the same time. So there's no decay of photons and stuff like that. So that's one example of what violates the speed of time. So time doesn't exist in the photonic world, if I want to put it that way.
Well, when you say there's no decay, I mean, time doesn't necessarily imply that everything has to decay, right? Decay is an attribute that we see in a lot of things based on time, but there's no, like, when I'm talking about time, I'm just talking about things passing in time, in one direction. And so for me, violating the concept of time would need to mean that we see something traveling backward in time. And I have read reports of people who claim that the arrow of time has been violated. But when I read those reports, there's always a weaker link than that the direction of time is being violated. So Mike has his party hat on. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, there's probably another level beyond where we're able to talk about in this thing, but what was just said is there's a difference between group velocity and phase velocity, and there's several other kinds of velocity. And group velocity, when you send a photon, can't go faster than the speed of light. But through entanglement, through tunneling, you can appear to go faster than the speed of light, and you can actually transmit you can have a cause that, shall we say, an effect that comes before the cause.
So
how can that be?
If you can post an article, claiming that an effect comes before the cause, those are the types of articles that I've read, Mike. And so far as I can tell, they reject much more likely hypotheses in favor of saying that time is going in the opposite direction, rather than taking the most logical course of action. And I think it makes for good news articles to say that time is traveling backwards, or that the effect happens before the cause, and it probably gets some scientists funding, but I don't think it's the most logical explanation for the evidence that's presented in the articles that I've read. So I'm not saying no one's ever claimed that, but I am saying that I don't think that's ever been the most logical explanation for the things that have been observed.
You shouldn't. You can't count on reversing aging using that technique, but you can count on quantum tunneling to appear instantly across a barrier. So, from a practical point of view, nothing goes faster than the speed of light. But from in terms of the quantum world, the nano world, the very small, and likely the very large, and maybe it's done by warping space, so it looks like instantaneously, so it looks like you're not passing that the distance is zero rather than the time is zero. And Michael M. probably has a similar, Brian Greene, etc. Some of the people have a similar shut up and calculate note that we might have had in physics. But there are things that happen that, and I'll see if I can research a non-mathematical article that talks about this qualitatively. Thank you.
No problem. And just so you know, I did do a quick check on ChatGPT, and it does say that quantum tunneling does not observe anything faster, traveling faster than the speed of light, or that it violates the principle of causality. So you may want to try to post an article that I can read offline, Mike, that says otherwise. So go ahead, because ChatGPT is not always right. I'm very open to it being wrong, but I'd love to read an article that makes those claims along with the evidence that it uses to support them. So that said, thanks for your comments, Mike. Good to see you. Constance.
Yes, I really like theories. So I liked tonight's thing. I see you're drinking wine.
Great.
The idea that Adam had given earlier about the river, it from a point of view of overall and not our daily experience is good. The way that you described it was good for the way that on a daily basis we see time and observe time here on Earth.
Right.
So I think both are correct at the same time.
They are. And you know, like the reason I chose the option, the description of falling is because you don't fall up, right? Things fall down. And so it shows the arrow of time. The river, you can sort of swim backwards in a river if you swim hard enough, and the river's not going too fast. And so, but I like the idea that it sort of keeps open the possibility of time dilation, to think of it as a flow and a river with different sorts of flow. I think that's a better analogy
Yes,
for near
because
speed of light travel.
space-time can be bent, just not here on Earth. I don't think it can be bent.
Yeah, we don't generally
But
go close to the speed of light on Earth.
But thank you for this very theoretical discussion.
Sure.
I am done with my comments.
Thank you, Constance. Michael, go ahead.
Have there been any experiments that confirm the existence of the fifth and sixth dimension besides the mathematical theories?
You mean the ones that I proposed? Or do you mean the ones in string theory?
Any actual experiments that has confirmed the existence of the fifth and sixth dimension?
Do you mean the fifth and sixth dimensions that I proposed, or the ones that string theory proposes?
The one, it doesn't matter. As of right now, for me, all of this is theoretical. Yeah.
So it's string theory. I would imagine that they have hypotheses and have run experiments on. You know, my hypothesis is not widely circulated, so I don't think. So let me put it this way: like, if my hypothesis is right, you perform such experiments every single day whenever you make any decision, right? You're immediately traveling through the fifth dimension by deciding what you want to eat for breakfast and lunch and dinner. You're always traveling through the fifth dimension by using your free will to decide what you're going to do and what you're going to intend to do. And so the actual truth is that the scientific experiments that also support my hypothesis on the fifth dimension are those in quantum mechanics, which says that at the quantum level, there are random fluctuations that are non-deterministic according to Bell's inequality, unless they are deterministic based on things that are further away than outer space. And like I said, the inverse square fields law basically says that the things that are most impactful in mass energy are the things that are closest to it, meaning that they're inversely related to the distance. So the further the distance away, the less likely it is to have an impact on something. And so the idea that stuff as far away as outer space is impacting deterministically subatomic particles is unfathomable, to me. It's just highly indefensible. And then once I wrote my essay on free will, I became, very confident that I could say that superdeterminism was wrong. As far as the sixth dimension, I don't think there is any knowable way to validate or refute the hypothesis I had on the sixth dimension. So to be fair, that's why I said it's super theoretical. The fifth dimension, I think we have lots of evidence for. I have an essay on free will defending, and every decision every one of us makes every day validates the fifth dimension, and that we're traveling through these parallel possibilities, these parallel dimension possibilities. The things that we know are likely possibilities are the ones that we're deciding from amongst, and we decide which one we want to experience. And the more we try to make one happen, the more likely it is to happen. So that I can answer. I haven't looked at the experiments on string theory, because when I read their explanations of the higher dimensions, it basically seemed like a bunch of nonsense that was just trying to create explanations that fit their complicated math. And someone another night, I think it was at one of our events, maybe it was in a group that I'm a part of, but someone basically said how a lot of scientists hide behind complex math and try to act like they're right just because they make the math complex enough that no one else can follow it. And I think that's really what string theory is about. And that's why a lot of it has been, largely debunked with the predictions that they made not coming true. So, I think that it was an explanation of they were the smartest people in the room, and so they got away with coming up with a hypothesis that wasn't really very well defendable. So that said, JP Cuddy.
So let me add
Oh,
something.
I'm sorry.
here.
Go ahead. Do you want to respond to that, Michael? Go ahead.
I do, yes. So to me, we often in these complex maths, we hypothesize why we get some of the results we get. Okay, now that's not a proof, that's a theory. So the only way for me to confirm those hypotheses is to actually have an experiment that confirms it. So my question was not rather a hypothesis in string theory or anything or any other math, because what you have, your explanation to me doesn't go beyond a simple decision tree, and you are proposing that you, by making a decision, you're jumping from one dimension to another. Has there been any experiments that show that?
So theoretically, if there are parallel dimensions, we don't have any experimental knowledge of them. But we know that there are different possibilities, right? If I go into my breakfast table, I know I could eat Cheerios or cornflakes, right? I know both of those are possibilities. And for me, like, it's very much my decision. And if my essay on free will, which I think you would enjoy, quite frankly, and potentially learn from, if it's right, like literally nothing other than God, if he's sixth dimensional, knows whether we're going to choose cornflakes or Cheerios, assuming that we like both, and that we could choose at any given day. What my daughter wants for breakfast, for example, I can never figure out what she wants. There's certain things she likes more, but every day she picks different stuff, and here she is, right, when I'm talking about her. So if papi tiene mucha gente aquí, no puedes hablar, mi amor.
iPad and you just have magic.
Busca el iPad. Papi va a hacerlo. So all I'm saying is that I don't think that, like, I don't even know if these parallel dimensions even exist in reality, or if it's just hypothetical dimensions that might exist, and there really is only the one that we experience that comes into existence. and the past is whatever the past was, and that is set in stone. What I can say with high confidence is that what we're going to experience in the future is non-deterministic and is based on people's free will, including our own. And that said, Mike has his already add on. So you can respond to that quickly, and then let Mike jump in.
Right. So the only math that I've seen that actually makes sense is superdeterminism. Beyond that, everything else is a hypothesis.
Superdeterminism is
At
also
least for
a
me.
hypothesis. And it's one, like I said, that is very hard to defend. And again, I think you would benefit from reading my essay on free will, because I think it's the final nail in the coffin of superdeterminism, quite frankly.
I'll take a look.
Okay.
Garrett, maybe, I don't know if you have the essays near, maybe you could post them in chat, free will and
Yeah.
determinism.
I'll do that.
I think Mike wants to go.
Yeah, Mike Soren, you wanted to comment on that.
Well, you know, about I understand you're a high level software programmer. You know about how you search a list by a binary search, and that's fast. But a hashing algorithm gets you to the point a lot faster. ChatGPT uses a hashing algorithm that puts the each of the word pairs and their relationships and their probabilities in a n-dimensional hypersphere rather than along a straight line. And so it hashes to a huge number of word pairs because it operates based on building strings of word pairs and then reassembling them. And you get too many of them to be able to effectively do them by a binary search or by even a linear hashing algorithm. So they put them on an n-dimensional hypersphere and then retrieve them instantaneously mathematically. And Wolfram has a 2-hour video that explains how that works in his context.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said is true, but it's also true that it's my understanding is that it's also a neural net, but it is doing what you're talking about as well.
Well, it's not. It's a straight. That part of it is a straight mathematical algorithm that puts pairs of words together in probability matrices.
So none of this is actually. Some of what you said, I have read and I believe in, and I've actually done quite a bit of research in my days at DARPA on the neural nets and some of the inferencing techniques and some of the decisions. But the hashing algorithm, it is not a hashing algorithm because you can go backwards on neural net. If it was a hashing algorithm, you would not be able to go backwards. So hashing algorithm, the key what it offers is it's a one-directional mapping, whereas in a neural net, in ChatGPT, you do go backwards in when you are doing regressions, and you go back to optimize the coefficients. So yeah, I still need to get convinced these other dimensions. Anytime we have these complex maths that we elaborate on, we come up with these hypotheses that needs to be tested and it needs to be shown and proved. And I haven't seen any of that. Yeah, I don't believe ChatGPT actually does talk about the additional dimensions.
When you say the additional dimensions, you mean string theory?
No, I was talking about the ChatGPT. I think the gentleman mentioned multi dimensions within the ChatGPT as how it groups. And I look at of the words that have similar meanings. I look at that as somewhat a nearest neighbor algorithm, which basically it gets to choose a word, the proper word within that group that it wants to select, and randomly, depending on what was it they were calling it, the thermal coefficient, or so depending on that, they introduce an element of randomness, and based on that, they decide which algorithm decides randomly within that nearest neighbor which word it's going to choose for its forecast. But nowhere I have seen, I would really like to hear, where does it even brings up the subject of multi-dimensions within the chat GPT? That would be very interesting to know.
Yeah, if you have an article for that, Mike, go ahead and post it. I know I haven't heard that before either. I do know that it's a neural net, but I had not heard that it uses a multidimensional hashing function, although it wouldn't surprise me. Hashes are great at efficiency, like you said, Mike. So I love hash I love hashing stuff. So that said, let's let JP Cuddy go next.
I have a question, Garrett.
Yeah.
About your thought experiment, but I need to understand 2 points. I don't need them re-explained, just if I understood. You described a line as an infinite number of points, and each point is only one thing. It's a this or that, correct?
Right.
Okay, so a plane would be the same kind of thing. It's all these parallel lines, but each line itself is still just going to be an infinite number of points, meaning one thing or another, correct?
An infinite number of combinations of where there is something and isn't something at different points in the line. And so like there's probably one line where it's all points, and there's another line where there's no points, and then there's everything in between.
Okay. You also said to explain the expanding idea of dimensions, you could take the third dimension, 3 dimensions, and collapse them down to a plane, and then put slides of planes next to each other to explain the next dimension, correct?
So just to be clear, when I say you collapse it down, you're not losing any of the information. We're only collapsing it down for the visualization purposes. All the other dimensions are still in there. They're still, the data is still there. The existence and non-existence is still there, but we're collapsing them down to visualize what would a parallel dimension look like in that scenario. Is that clear?
Yes, but even if it's only a visualization now, once I take 3 dimensions and collapse it down to 2 dimensions, that line is collapsed down to its own, every one of those lines is collapsed down to a point, having more than just an either or.
No, that's what I'm saying is like,
if we visualize collapsing it down to experiment or to experience these other slide dimensions on the sides, can I just take all those dimensions on the sides, say now that's a third dimension, collapse that down again to a second dimension, keep doing this ad infinitum, and keep saying, well, there's multiple dimensions going on and on, and keep collapsing down.
Yeah, I get why you would say that. And this is part of what I learned how to do in linear algebra, is how you can collapse things down without losing the information. You're collapsing them down for visualization purposes only. So when I collapse 3-dimensional space down to 2-dimensional space, it's not that information is lost. Like we have the exact same number of infinite lines. We have the exact same number of spaces on those lines. It's just that we're not going to pay attention to a little bit of that data for visualization reasons. We're going to pay attention to something new, which is now going to be the z-axis going up and down. And we're going to pretend that we understand that, you know, a line is all of 3-dimensional space, for example, and that, you know, in parallel to a line that's all of 3-dimensional space for all of time, you know, a parallel line is a whole nother version of 3-dimensional space in parallel, and that whole 3-dimensional space still exists. And if you look at that line, it's all there. You know, we're not losing data or information. We're just doing it for visualization purposes, because as 5-dimensional beings, we can really only conceive of 3 dimensions. Like that's all we observe is 3 dimensions. And we observe 3 dimensions over time, so we can conceive of time. And so we can kind of conceive of 4 dimensions. We can conceive of 3 dimensions and time passing, but we can't visualize 4 dimensions. Try to draw a 4-dimensional sphere. I mean, there are like attempts to do it, but it's really 3-dimensional interpretations of a 4-dimensional thing. And so the only way we can really understand 4 dimensions is to collapse 3 dimensions down to 2, and then look at the z-axis as being the fourth dimension. Does that make sense?
It does. All I'm asking is the question I've seen before is once we're able to take a third dimension and make it a second dimension so that we could then recreate this extra third dimension again. So we say that's the fourth dimension if we understand it. Every time I do that, I've now created a new third dimension, even though one of those dimensions is collapsed down, extra, right? So this plane is really my 3 dimensions. I've just collapsed it down to explain the fourth dimension now coming off of the z-axis. Every time I do that, I can keep collapsing that extra dimension down. This third dimension becomes a second dimension. I create a third dimension, which is actually fourth dimension, but I'm now trying to visualize fourth dimension by making the third dimension the second. Fourth dimension comes down to a third. I can do that again. Take that third dimension down to second dimension.
The thing is,
And
yeah, the thing is,
how many
like
times can I do that?
these dimensions like represent real things, and we have to be able to conceive of the higher dimension. And the highest one that I can conceive of, and I'm pretty good at abstract thought, is 6 dimensions. Like after the 6th dimension, like, you know, I got nothing, you know, like after, you know, losing cause and effect, like cause and effect is so fundamental. I can't imagine any scenario. Like, I don't think there has been ever an observed scenario where cause and effect was not in play. I think everything is cause and effect that we observe, everything about the physical universe, the, you know, knowledge, wisdom, like everything we can conceive of is about cause and effect. And so for me, the 6th dimension is no longer assuming cause and effect. Now, what even a parallel thing to cause and effect looks like, I don't even know. And so, sure, theoretically, mathematically, you could keep, you know, collapsing down over and over again infinitely. And that's what the string theory people do to get 12 dimensions. But it's all nonsense, right? They can't describe in a logical way what any of those dimensions really mean. They can't even describe the 5th and 6th dimensions logically. I at least got those. But they can't conceive of like what those dimensions mean logically at all. Does that make sense? Where like mathematically, you're right. You can keep collapsing infinitely, but it's not meaningful if it doesn't mean anything.
I think the best thing you're saying there is we could do it an amount of times as we want to, but once we lose the meaning, it doesn't mean anything.
I agree. And that's why I say the 6th dimension isn't very meaningful, right? Because, you know, up to the 5th dimension, it is meaningful, right? Like to understand that the 5th dimension is free will would be innovative. Like if that's true, it's innovative. And to understand that our free will is what helps us navigate the many worlds that the many worlds hypothesis agrees with would be innovative. Now, if those things are true, they're innovative and they're potentially adding some value to people's lives. You know, time will tell whether or not they're true and whether or not that's right. But that's what I'm putting out into the universe. So that said, Mike had his party hat on. What did you want to say, Mike?
Put the a link in there, but this is very abstract as to how you use this. Our minds, like there is a book called Flatland that says somebody who lives in Flatland can't visualize 3 dimensions. It's totally counterintuitive, but you can use if you lived in Flatland, you can make use of a 3 of up and down, even though it doesn't it's not intuitive. And similarly, we can make use of higher dimensions and calculate everything we want to know about it by bringing it back to the to our 3-dimensional or whatever we want to call our world. But there's no way that our mind can visualize it. And that article that I produced has to do with the interaction between magnetic field in semiconductors with and lasers with pumping with a pump, which is a fairly abstract thing, but it's there and you can do things with it. But you're not going to be able to do anything with it. Just like you're not going to be able to visualize it, just like you can't visualize a Möbius strip or of the universe or a whole list of other things you can't visualize. And you mentioned Bell's theorem. That's in the same league. Bell's theorem says you can't do this the way, but he didn't really say you can't do this. He can't do this the way people have been trying to do that. And I think that's what the other Michael may have alluded to in some of his comments. Yeah, Bell's inequality is not is just saying that that special case he investigated is false.
So maybe I'm gonna let DLJ go next, and I'll try to read your essay. I tried to skim it, Mike, but it's not skimming material. Although I was a little bit perplexed that when they say a two-dimensional electron gas, because 2 dimensions like is not physical. Like there is no such thing as a two-dimensional gas. All gas is 3-dimensional. So I don't know what they mean by a two-dimensional electron gas.
Don't feel bad about it. I don't understand it either, even though I can understand the notation.
This is where I'm saying, Mike, sometimes people want to be the smartest person in the room, and by saying stuff that makes no sense, they try to trick people into thinking they have something innovative. And I really like Einstein's quote, which is, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old child, you don't understand it well enough. And I think I can explain just about anything I know to my 6-year-old kids. And there's lots of stuff I don't know, and there's lots of stuff that I'm still learning, but I think we should be able to explain things in simple terms that will help anyone understand it, or we just, quite frankly, either don't know what we're talking about or don't understand it well enough. And again, not that you're going to explain all the nuance, right? But you know, I got my kids like quantum physics for babies, like when they were kids. So like, you know, everything is like in some way or shape or form explainable in a simplified way if you understand it well enough. So
and it got published in Nature. It's a refereed paper, and some really smart people.
Yeah,
a lot smarter than me, refereed it. The people who wrote it may not have been smart, but the people who refereed it are probably a lot smarter than me.
Oh, it's very possible that the people who wrote it were smarter than the people who refereed it. So that said, DLJ, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Sound okay? You can hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Excellent. Yeah, this is the downside of the party hat. While you're waiting in the queue, people are interjecting with things that you were going to say. So, yeah. Fun thought experiment. I admire you for putting it down on paper and getting it challenged. I'm having flashbacks to my 12-year-old self when the maths teacher, RIP, my favorite teacher, introduced the idea of what's it like if you're on a 1 dimension and a 2-dimensional being comes into your world, and he was essentially explaining flatland. And we all went, ooh, so we would go, oh, ghosts. That's what ghosts are. When we were 12. And then the following week, of course, he comes in and says, right, I'm going to teach you some physics, and this is why ghosts don't exist. So that's a lesson learned in theory versus practical. So a suggestion, first of all, on the paper, I think it is a good idea to give a definition of dimension. By saying you're kind of defining dimension by each dimension that you're describing means that you don't have a meta category or meta label. I mean, dimension could be a different thing each time, right? So I think Mike's suggestion of using variables or variables that we can move along or through, or basically variables, might be a better idea. Because you at the beginning of the talk, you said infinite in length for all dimensions. So that implies length, implying therefore time is not a dimension. So you kind of have to pick, I think you have to pick some definition of dimension is a suggestion there. The paper on libertarian free will, mainly for Michael's benefit, because he's going to review it. As you know, I've had a look at it. I think it is a good argument against hard determinism, but I don't think you made the case against super determinism that Michael was talking about, or compatibilism or soft determinism. So you've kind of got a non sequitur by saying it's not hard determinism, therefore it is libertarian free will. So I see that as a non sequitur. If you can make the case against super determinism and soft determinism, I'm going to be on board. Right? I'm okay with free will, by the way, but in a different sense. So that now the main point I wanted to make, I haven't run out of time. Oh yeah, so this is about moving. Right, so this is about whether you're stating that when you make a selection as to which breakfast cereal, right, you're choosing from different futures. This is quite quantum physics. I like this. It's kind of, you know, reducing the probability field, whatever, collapsing. So choice collapses the the future options. That's a kind of quantum physics thing. So yeah, okay. Are you saying that those other potential futures, which are now pasts once you've chosen them, are real and tangible, and therefore you can move between them, which means implying that you could, if you can do time travel, jump between different futures and pasts as well, if you've got these different dimensions? If so, that's unfalsifiable, which was the point about there's no practical experiment for this. So great to take it on, but I currently not seeing anything. It's currently unfalsifiable. So great as a thought experiment, but I'm not sure how much further we can go from there. Anyway, those
Sorry,
are
what was unfalsifiable? Say it again. You reminded me of something else that I forgot to mention, so I was taking a note of that.
So if you're arguing that we're making the, like, whatever being is making a choice between going left or right or choosing which breakfast cereal to have, right? If we are creating or selecting from these other futures, therefore, once we make that decision, we're creating an alternative past. Is that past a tangible thing? Because you're implying that you can move between them if there's the different dimensions, right? So if it is a tangible thing, then what's the experiment for that? As Michael was saying, it's unfalsifiable. There's no practical experiment that I can imagine, because I'm not very intelligent, obviously, so my brain doesn't work well enough on that. So it's like, yeah, so you've got an unfalsifiable hypothesis, which is the snag. But
no, it is
great
falsifiable. I'll explain to you. It's not right now, but I'll explain to you, and you are smart, so you'll understand what I'm saying. A couple of things, because you covered a bunch of topics. So one is that Flatland, when one of my friends read my essay, he told me to read Flatland, so I read it, and that's the closest thing I've seen to my essay. And as far as the suggestion of giving a definition of the dimension, I can try to do it. Like, I guess, I did try to do it in the presentation in saying that it is a, each dimension that each n+1 dimension is a parallel but slightly different version of the n-1 dimension. And so it becomes more tangible at 3 dimensions, because that's what we observe. And so I think it is a good suggestion. I'll try to noodle on if there's a way that I can come up with a tangible definition of what a dimension is. But it is a little hard to encapsulate both space and time and higher dimensions.
I agree.
With, consistent definition without being so abstract that it's kind of useless. And so the description of the dimensions was the best way that I do it. But then again, I tend to dive into the details and then come up for water and describe what I came up with afterwards. So I think it's a good suggestion. As far as the essay on free will, I do think it does make a good case against superdeterminism and soft determinism. So I would encourage you to try to ask me questions, or like come up with some reason that I essentially proved that determinism itself is wrong and soft determinism is still determinism, which is that there's only one possible future. And I basically made the argument that there is not only one possible future, that there are multiple possible futures at any given moment in time. And then in fact, the natural laws, which is what determinism says, determine the future solely, are not possible to be the only future determinant, because if that were the case, it would be consistent and complete, which Gödel's incompleteness theorem says that no system is consistent and complete. So I think it actually,
you can't, sorry to interrupt, but you can have multiple possible futures with soft determinism. So that's why you haven't negated that one yet. With hard determinism,
so you would have to post a source, saying that, because that's actually the very definition of libertarian free will.
No, well, compatibilism, right? So you can have a
No,
deterministic.
I know what
Yeah.
compatibilism is, and the very definition of compatibilism is that there's only one possible future.
No,
Is
no.
that the laws of
You-
physics, or the natural laws, is what they say in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, is the sole determinant of the future. Now,
I think
if you can
okay.
post a scholarly article saying that soft determinism says that there are multiple possible futures, then I'm happy to use that terminology
no.
going forward, but I haven't seen one.
Yeah, no, I think there's a conflation with between determinism and predeterminism. I think that's might be the error. But anyway, I've taken up enough time. Ginny, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Jenny, go ahead.
This discussion
Oh,
of fifth dimensionalism.
Ginny, I
Yeah.
apologize. There was one other thing that was important that DLJ brought to my mind that I wanted to bring up is time travel. So as far as the falsifiable problem, and you're not going to like this, DLJ, it's not going to feel very satisfying, but I actually came up with a hypothesis of how time travel could be theoretically possible without what's it called, a paradox. And this is the falsifiable experiment: is if you went back in time and killed your own grandparent, right? The paradox goes, if you went back in time and killed your own grandparent, then how could you possibly exist? So it must be impossible. You can't go back in time and kill your own grandparent. However, what I would argue is, if these multiple dimensions are, actually existing, then in theory, you could go back in time in another parallel universe, kill your grandparent, and in that parallel universe, you never actually come to fruition, but the you from the parallel universe, which was able to travel parallel universes, is present in that parallel universe. So theoretically, if it's possible to travel parallel universes, you could, create a falsifiable experiment where you travel to a past that never existed in the past that you've experienced. And that is theoretically possible in a many worlds scenario where traveling amongst the different parallel universes is possible. So not very satisfying for you, I know, but nonetheless, if time travel does become possible, I was working on equations on that in college. I think I had a good start, but who knows? I don't have time to go back to my college textbooks and vet them with people with the math that I had back then that I don't have anymore. So that said, I'm going to let Ginny go next.
This topic, although it's very interesting and it's slightly above my head, fifth dimensionalism, sixth dimension, and string theory and all that. But when it comes to something that I can relate to, Cheerios versus Frosted Flakes or whatever, maybe a better choice might be broccoli versus kale or something. Sorry, Garrett, I'm being silly and trying to be.
I agree. We should talk about healthy vegetables, Jenny.
Especially if there are children in the meeting. No, I'm just kidding again.
I know.
Give me Frosties any day.
What's that?
I said, I object. Give me Frosties any day. Over kale.
There you go.
My daughter is a Cinnamon Toast Crunch fan, so she likes the sweet stuff and she's very picky. So I just feed it to her because at least she'll eat that. So this one is actually a good eater, right, Amia?
It's very and very beautiful.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'm trying to be a comic relief, but I guess I didn't succeed.
You did succeed.
Oh my, you have two beautiful daughters there.
Thank you.
Yes, as always. Hello, daughters.
I want to just add magic.
Yeah.
What this is.
Just add magic. So cool, Daddy.
Good to see you.
I don't know. You have to ask Mommy this. Ask Mommy. Is she sleeping?
Can you turn this off and then leave it?
Yeah, we can do it another day.
No.
But I don't know. You're gonna have to ask Mommy this. I don't know the pin. Papi no puede ayudar. No.
I'm sorry, Garrett. What language are you speaking there?
I mean, I was speaking English for a second, but then I went to Spanish. So I normally speak Spanish to them,
Huh. Oh, that's interesting.
but I was speaking English for a minute. So maybe that confused you because you're used to me speaking them in English. So, or in Spanish. So Ellis, go ahead.
I was going to say, if anyone wants to raise their hand, now would be a good time. And also, I think there's a dinner coming up on the 29th, was it? So if there's anyone in New York that would like to meet Garrett and enjoy a nice meal, that's happening. And I think upcoming, we're going to have some critical thinking events, so you all can look out for that.
We are. Thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to actually.
Oh, and
maybe I'll
another
give a
thing,
preview.
maybe you could talk a little bit about membership. I'll post the link. And also, if anybody would like to hop in and let us know any topics they want to see in the future, you're welcome to tell us that as well, so that we can create that for you.
Let me give a quick preview into the critical thinking. This is going to be much more practical than tonight. So I'm going to cover in a variety of events. We're going to start with research or information literacy, the two together. And then we're going to talk about evidence evaluation, how you can take the things that you research and the information you gather and vet it for whether or not it's useful. And then we're going to talk about formal logic and how to use that to create, 100% accurate, given your assumptions, conclusions. And then we're going to talk about types of bias that we should be aware of, which some types of bias we need to realize will steer us in the wrong direction. That's falling off this cliff. Some types of inference will create wrong conclusions, and that's falling off this cliff. And fallacies will always create wrong conclusions. That's falling off this cliff, where they're coming up with bad, bad conclusions. And then the ones that come up with good conclusions teach us about our knowledge of objective reality, which then is used as a foundation for creating wisdom. And I would argue wisdom is the ability to make decisions that prevent significant unnecessary harm, and I'll go into what that means. And then B, after we've prevented significant unnecessary harm for all human beings and ideally sentient beings at some point, but more importantly for human beings, then we should increase happiness and decrease harm for the people that we can influence. And so this is ultimately what the next series of conversations are going to be about. So for anyone interested in that, please come to the series on critical thinking. It's near and dear to me. I think it's what is needed most in this world, is to help people with critical thinking skills. And I think there are a lot of people here that can add value to the lectures and augment them with their own opinions and ideas, as people have been doing tonight. And so I really welcome people's contributions to those. If anyone wants to collaborate on any of these, feel free to reach out to me as well, if those topics interest you and you have any interest in collaborating. So that said, if anyone has other questions on dimensions, we're happy to take questions. If not, it seems like there's a lot of interest in free will. We could talk about free will as well, although it's 8:20, so I can't go through the whole argument defending free will, but I could go through a Cliff Notes version of it if people want to talk about that. It seems to be a very popular topic.
Garrett, did you want to talk about the membership a bit too?
Oh yeah, thanks, Ellis. So let me pull up the membership document so that I can see, mi amor.
It's free at this time, so if anyone would like to join, smaller group discussions and make friends,
Es que
it's a
mami
good way.
tiene que tener la contraseña.
She doesn't know, like thing.
Daddy doesn't know it either. I'll have to look at it tomorrow. No puedo hacerlo en medio, no puedo. Mi amor, papi tiene mucha gente esperándole. Papi tiene mucha gente esperándole. No puedo, mi amor, no puedo, te amo. No podemos. No funciona. Mañana te puedo ayudar. Mañana. Mi amor, mañana. Sorry, guys. So let me talk a little bit. Aliyah, déjame.
That's okay. That's okay.
Mi
Some of
amor.
us have raised our children and we miss those times.
I know, I do. I'm absolutely loving it, but it's a little hard when you when you have almost 20 people waiting for you on a Zoom and she just wants my attention. Lo siento, mi amor. Mi amor, hay 20 personas esperándome.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me explain the goals. Aliyah, de veras, para ayudar. Tú puedes ir a la tele. Puedes ir a la tele. No, no puedes. Bueno, te puedo poner en YouTube.
Women don't take no for an answer.
No.
That is pretty much how it's going. So, no puedo.
So is that the in the sorry, I gotta notice. Is that the NYU library in your background?
No, it's actually Cornell's oldest library. I'm a Cornell.
Oh, that's
grad.
right. That's right.
Yeah,
Got
but I think that it was modeled after the one in what is it, Trinity Library, which is where the Harry Potter library is based on. So, momentito, mi amor, papi está haciendo. ¿Qué quieres ver?
Hit video.
Running out of charge again.
No, these are all just.
You wanted to see octopus.
No.
What do you want to see? Rápido.
Octonauts. Octonauts.
Come
Yay.
on. Okay, so the FTI membership is about increasing happiness and decreasing harm for people that members can influence, and then helping each other earn enough money that money no longer buys happiness, or really in the US, that's about $95,000 USD a year. Although ideally we would want to get to enough money that we can retire making that just on investment income alone. That should be very doable depending on where you're starting off. And then we want to engage with diverse opinions in a polite forum where we can learn from each other and help each other achieve life goals, which is a way of enabling each other to make more prosperous and balanced choices and acquire knowledge and wisdom. And we really want to create like a community of friends that help each other be the best version of ourselves, seek truth, and be fair. And if having friends that will help you be the best version of yourself, help you seek truth, and help you be fair sounds appealing, then membership may be a good thing for you. Right now, there's no fee for membership. There may be at some point. There's a separate members curriculum, which members get access to. That is a series of videos teaching things like how to achieve your life's goals in a state of flow, how to give and receive feedback, because that's part of having a growth mindset. And there are other benefits to membership as well. So for those looking to be a part of a community that helps you be the best version of yourself, seek truth, and be fair, I would love for you to look into membership and apply. And Mike has his hand up, so I'm going to let him go.
You ask about possible topics. This topic of how we view n dimensions or abstract concepts is kind of what has been called an emergent property. There's something out there called The Game of Life by Conway that talks about really simple rules give emergent properties and even consciousness and forecasting and the kinds of, and free will is an emergent property. I'm not sure that something happened to civilization 20,000 years ago when people stopped becoming a hunter-gatherer group, that led to a mushrooming of an exponential growth of civilization and knowledge. And that was an emergent property of some very simple decision rules. And that's what's going on in certain kinds of artificial intelligence, like genetic algorithms and that sort of thing. And it appears that how we throw rocks to hit things, which and be able to calculate those kind of complicated equations to decide where that rock is going to hit, didn't occur to prehistoric man and to animals. And so at a certain critical level of complexity, emergent properties that weren't expected appear. And there is some relatively intuitive literature on that sort of thing that I think if you gave that the same kind of treatment you gave to this subject to that would interest a lot of us.
I didn't understand what the request was. Say it again. You mean about emergent properties?
Reframe and tie together this discussion and consciousness as emergent properties of our intellect.
So yes, I think so. I think consciousness would be a great topic for another night. So let's definitely do that. We actually had a panel on consciousness where I had a couple of other speakers share their perspectives and I shared mine, but I only shared mine in a small portion of the time. I wanted to give more of the time to the other speakers, but I think consciousness is a good one that I can add value on. I will tell you, Mike, that you may not agree with me because emergent property is, what I think scientists give the name to of things that they can't explain and they want to keep boxed within the realm of science. It's basically a way to be the smartest person in the room and say, I understand that. It's simply an emergent property. Like, here's my PhD and this is an emergent property. Well, emergent property really just means we don't really understand it. It doesn't fit in our box, but we're going to put it in our box and call it an emergent property. For those not familiar, emergent property just means out of a system of things, an emergent property is something that arises from that system of things without any good explanation of how it comes about. It's just so complex that we don't understand it, which is why what I'm saying is not actually, I'm basically saying that politically incorrect definition of emergent property. But if you read the politically correct definition and have mine in the back of your mind, I think you'll see that it actually resonates. So that said, I do think consciousness would be great, Mike, and we should talk about that.
I said I was in on your discussion of consciousness, and you've discussed it in some of your older philosophy groups that you ran a few years ago, and free will. But the Conway's paper and Conway's simple computer program does try to give, doesn't just say it's too complicated to understand. They're saying how this occurred by just complexity alone, that as kind of a local property of, shall we say, entropy, that even things that tend to disorder tend to create local pockets of real order.
Got it. Is that Anne Conway?
I don't remember. There's some knowing looks that people have read Conway's paper on the game of life. Google game of life, which I'm trying to do now, but my system isn't smart enough, isn't fast enough.
Got it. If you have the paper, could you send it to me, Mike?
I'll try and post it here, or I'll post it on Discord later.
That'd be awesome. Thanks so much, my friend. Kafui, you had your party hat on.
Yeah, just want to make a quick comment on the dimensions. So I think I agree with you on sometimes when science reach a roadblock, they begin to theorize and make things extremely complicated instead of just saying that, hey, we don't know what's going on here and we are stuck.
Philosophers do that too, by the way.
But I think sometimes we also, the consumers of those theories, sometimes we also become to believe everything they say. For example, the Big Bang. Most people think it's a proof or it's a fact. It's just a theory, right? Right now we are learning that there are some galaxies that are way older than they need to be in like, I think 100 million years. They don't need to be as big as what they are. So those theories are also being debunked. So I think science, I agree with you. We have to be very skeptical about science as well. We don't just accept things because somebody, from, PhD or say things that complex the masses. So I think I agree with you. But my question to you is that, are you saying that free will is another dimension or another dimension? So you are equating free will after time?
So yes, I think that not only free will, but parallel sets of laws of physics are the fifth dimension. And that's, the dimension higher than time.
Okay.
And by the way, you may enjoy, if you want to reach out to me on Discord or on email, I'll put my email in the chat. If you reach out to me, I can get you the video for my presentation on the origins of the universe, where I basically argue that the Big Bang was not the beginning of time. If you read scientists' explanation for what existed before the Big Bang and how long it existed, you'll realize that it really is kind of nonsense. And so I have a much better explanation, I think, for the origins of the universe, quote unquote, because I think it's eternal. But I have a good explanation for how it's eternal and cyclical. And by the way, what you were talking about like, don't you believe someone just because they're a PhD is actually, there's a logical fallacy called an appeal to authority, which is just because someone's an authority, we're going to trust them with blind faith. And we have to all remember that just because someone's a PhD doesn't mean they definitely know what they're talking about. PhDs make mistakes too. They're still human. So we all are.
Even it doesn't just apply to PhD experts, people who call themselves so-called experts. We kind of default to experts, so he must or she must know everything. So even in most fields, most of the innovation don't come from those experts. They come from somebody who is not even in those fields. So that should tell us that, hey, experts don't know it all. So all right, thanks.
Thank you. Adam, go ahead.
So Mike actually, in his comment, reminded me of an interesting sort of an alternative theory that I heard about the explanation of where agriculture came from, where society evolved from, and explaining the vast difference between our initial evolutionary appearance and then our civilization appearance. And it was interesting because there's a few things I've seen in history that might show a possibility for it. The theory is that this is actually not the first civilizational arisal to happen in our history, and that over a couple different time frames of 100,000 years, we've had civilization rise, peak, fall, stagnate, rise, peak, fall, stagnate again and again. And something that I've seen that actually makes me think that could possibly be a thing is an example of what we did to some of our larger monuments over the past 2,000 years. Look at the pyramids. The pyramids were an ancient structure the Egyptians built. And when they were first built, they were encased in this white marble stone and were a vast difference than what they are today. And over a relatively short amount of time in terms of a species or a culture, they were stripped of resources for necessities need. So realistically, people would go and they would take blocks from the pyramids or the Colosseum in Rome and use them as building material to help their life at that point, not having any sort of respect for what it meant to the culture. And if you break that down over a long enough period, especially with survival being paramount over anything else, as it is in human society, it would explain a lack of any history past a certain point. So it's an interesting concept. I don't know for sure whether it's plausible, but it's definitely kind of something outside the realm of what's accepted. but it kind of makes a twisted sort of sense just because fiction is rarely stranger than truth.
Yeah, so I've hypothesized that. In fact, for those that are Lord of the Rings fans, that's the hypothesis of Lord of the Rings, is that the story of Lord of the Rings is supposed to be a precursor to European history, where the time of the Lord of the Rings was actually before modern European history. That was what Tolkien envisioned, and that was his original topic. The thing is, Adam, I guess like, we don't have any archaeological evidence that indicates that these past great civilizations existed. So, I think like, my guess is that they probably didn't. But who knows, right? Like theoretically they could have, but yeah.
It's an interesting thought experiment. Like I said, there's no, as you mentioned, there's no proof. We cannot prove one way or the other. So it's just an interesting thing of, hey, what if that could be it?
But I think there is a lot of global archaeological evidence that shows that, shows what the evolution of life on Earth has looked like, back to, very long distances in time. And so we do have evidence for it. Now, maybe all our evidence is wrong and some omnipotent God is cleverly hiding past civilizations. That's hypothetically possible, but very unlikely to be true, because what motive would they have to do that? But anyway, Shaunak has his hand up, his party hat on, so I'm going to let him comment.
No, I'm just thinking, Adam, you might be talking about something related to the Younger Dryas incident, right? It's so one thing. I don't know if it's a theory, and some people call it a conspiracy theory or whatnot, but it is true that there's not strong evidence for past, civilizations like that. But one thing that there's in literature, you'll see many civilizations always have that flood myth. It's they have the epic flood myth in many cultures, which indicates that there was a civilization one time before and it got destroyed and whatnot. And it is true that some 12,000 years ago or something like that, there was a massive cataclysmic event that destroyed a lot of stuff. I don't know if that necessarily destroys all the archaeological evidence that might be there, but it's a theory that's out there that I think that the one that you're pointing to, Adam. Some archaeologists say that there's professional archaeologists say that there's no evidence, but other amateur archaeologists, I'm forgetting the name of this guy, or some people call him a conspiracy theorist. They try to put forward that those kind of events did happen, and something like the pyramids. It's like it's non-explainable given the tools and features that they had at that time. How did they actually made it? Is that something similar to what you're referring to, Adam?
Slightly, but also looking at from the point of comparing human behavior in the past 2,000 years and basically correlating that human behavior does not really change much over a long period of time.
True.
So if you have a collapse of a large society, let's take Rome. Rome is a wonderful example. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the Colosseum famously became used as a quarry for stone and other materials and was slowly deconstructed to its current state because it was easier to take the material that had already been produced, quarried, and styled to produce local buildings than it was to go and gather it again. So my theory is more that if this is true, again, I'm not proposing that it is, it's more of an interesting thought experiment. It would also be interesting because when you look at how humanity operates in a survival situation or when there is a loss of a overarching civilization, it would explain a lack of archaeological remnants, mainly because they were constantly being repurposed to continue life as it exists at the moment. I theorize something similar would happen if we had a mass civilization collapse today. A place like New York, all the steel, glass, and concrete would eventually be taken and utilized for other buildings, other purposes over the course of 1,000 years, because it's more readily available there than it is to reproduce. And thus it's easier to take than make. But to your point, that is another theory I've heard, and it's a fun thought experiment. It's kind of it's a fun idea of, hey, maybe this is it. We don't really know. There's no really way to prove it, but it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm just reading the quote that what was your name? Deborah posted. And if you don't mind, Michael, I'm going to take a second to just digress a little bit. Deborah posted a quote which actually is very fascinating. The level of wisdom from the Buddha is just never ceases to amaze me. And he talks about how the world contracts at different times, and then life expands for a long period of time, and that I guess if you look at my hypothesis on the origins of the universe, it's essentially that there's an infinite number of big bangs, which, if that's true, kind of actually aligns with the Buddhist wisdom, which is that the universe contracts to a small, infinitesimally small point, not infinitesimally, but extremely small point, and then expands. In other words, as Deborah was describing, it breathes life into the universe, and that corner of the universe then breeds life of many varieties. And then eventually the edges of that universe collide with the edges of other big bangs, and it's not of the universe, but it's the edges of that expansion, or it's not even an expansion, it's just an explosion of mass energy, and it collides with the mass energy of other explosions, of other basically big bangs that happen throughout the universe, and they form massive black holes, which then contract and then expand again. And so the idea of breathing, it's kind of like these black holes and explosions are like breathing of the universe, which then breathes life into the universe. Although theoretically life could live on the edges of these big bangs indefinitely and survive, I believe, indefinitely if it was advanced enough, which I think it would be by the time such a thing happened. But that said, I found that to be a very interesting comment, Deborah, that I've not heard, even though I do like Buddhism a lot and learn a lot from it. I hadn't heard that particular sutra. So thank you for sharing it. Michael, you had your hand up. Did you want to share something else?
Oh,
No?
the Kai Fu wanted to say
Yeah.
something.
Go ahead, Kai-Fu.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, so just a comment on that. So we know in the universe there's cycles, right? There's cycles in the galaxy. So is it possible that the F has that was, is kind of tied to your multiple dimensional parallel universe? So is it possible that we may be in a different cycle, that whatever we are doing now may have happened, let's say, infinite number of years ago, and we are just, because we expand and we contract, and now we are starting all about the new birth, the new age, they call it. So, but how do we know that we are in a cycle? That's the thing. How will you know you're in a box if you don't know what's outside the box?
So by theorizing, right? And that's really what I've done, is theorized of, what I tried to do is think deeply about the things that we've observed in our observable universe. And as usual, I tried to think one level more meta. Like, what if this is not the only universe, right? Normally science says our visible universe is the only universe. But I said, well, what if there's more than one of these, right? And I theorized, like, well, what if there's a bunch of them, like, all happening throughout? And I also tried to theorize, what does the edge of space look like? And I couldn't imagine an edge of space, because what's beyond that? What's beyond the edge of space, which is what the ancient Greeks said. they said, imagine that I'm at the end of the universe and I shoot an arrow over the edge of the universe. Where does the arrow go? Right. And even the ancient Greeks realized there really should be no end of space. There should be no end. Like it's got to be infinite. And so that's where the Greeks thought that there was infinite time and space. And I'm with them on that. I just came up with a model that describes the phenomena we observe from the Big Bang and puts it together with an infinite number of Big Bangs and brings it all together in a way that is cohesive and cyclical and is logically consistent with everything that we've observed. And in fact, it creates an observation that if you look at the edges of our visible universe, they're accelerating, which you would think would be nonsense, because if there was a big bang, right, like energy should be dissipating as you get further away to the edges of the universe. And so things should be slowing down intuitively, but actually the things at the edge of the universe are accelerating. And if I'm right, the reason for that is that there's an infinite amount of mass energy pulling, with gravitational force, the edges of our universe in every direction. And so,
or it could be the Big Bang wasn't the Big Bang. There was something before the Big Bang that we don't know about.
That's what I'm describing is what was before the Big Bang.
Yeah, like dark energy or dark matter or something like that.
I don't think it's dark energy or dark matter. I think those are explanations for things that haven't been understood yet. And in fact, what I'm describing in terms of the acceleration of the edges of the universe are described by dark energy and dark matter by people who use complicated math to describe it. But I would argue that the idea that there's an infinite amount of mass energy in every direction, 360 degrees, is actually a better explanation than dark matter or dark energy.
But are you not contracting yourself in this case, saying that there's a Big Bang? If you mentioned, I think you said you are not totally on board with the Big Bang theory. So why use the Big Bang to explain?
So I'm on board with the observations, the physical observations from the Big Bang theory. What I'm not on board with is that time itself and the universe itself originated, at the beginning of the Big Bang. I think the universe is infinite and has existed infinitely, and that there are an infinite number of Big Bangs happening throughout the universe all over the place. So that's where I agree with the observable parts. What I don't agree with is the hypothetical parts that are not even mathematically defensible, let alone logically defensible. To say that there was a brute first moment in time, how did that first moment in time?
I was about to ask that question. Now, what causes the Big Bang? What causes that spike? I think at the end of the day, I think the Big Bang and religion, I think, kind of merge into that. I think religion knows that they cannot go further beyond the born of time, so they call it God, right? Science don't want to call it God, so they start with the Big Bang. And if you ask them, okay, what really sparks, where from the energy for the Big Bang? That's when they also don't have an answer. So I think our ancestors called those things God. There must be something greater that we don't know. We call it God that started the whole world. Okay. All right.
Yeah, and all I would say is that I do have a version of God that I can logically defend, and I think that and so I believe in God. I believe in the version of God that I can logically defend. But I agree with you that I think people historically used God to explain anything that they couldn't explain. And I think that's a fair explanation. Like if you can't explain anything in any other way, it's okay to attribute it to God and to look for spiritual wisdom in those areas, because let's face it, if science doesn't have a good answer, use whatever you can, right? Use God, use your friends, use your, use whatever resources you have.
Is your version of God defense from Descartes defense, or you're more of what? Are you using Descartes to defend God?
I don't know what Descartes' God looked like, but I'm pretty sure that I don't agree with him, because Descartes thinks that animals don't have souls, and I think animals do have souls. So I think Descartes and I probably disagree on God, is my guess, although I don't know his concept of God super well. So that said, I don't, if you don't mind, Kaifu, we do have two hands up. So Mike and Michael. So Mike Soren, go ahead first.
Okay. I'm not sure I should add to the confusion, but the statement about whether the universe is running down or running up or is oscillatory has to do with an argument that Einstein described as his worst mistake. His equation isn't really E equal mc squared. It's a series of tensor equations. And in that, there's something called the cosmological constant. And if that cosmological constant is either less than 1 or greater than 1, we have a universe that is either expanding or will eventually turn around. And as a Big Bang, empty space is not that simple. It's as a property of empty, if you have empty space in the same way that nature abhors a vacuum, empty space will eventually give rise to a Big Bang if you wait long enough. So as far as conspiracy theories of multiple civilization, there's a guy named Graham Hancock who expanded on that, and even beyond the Atlantis myth that Plato had. So again, I yield the balance of my party hat time. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't remember the details on the cosmological constant, so I'm going to try to do a quick refresher on that and come back to it if that's okay, and let Michael M go.
Yeah, thank you. So just a couple of things. Garrett, I think I sent you an email. Basically, I do have a conflict. I don't want to make this a personal thing, but with another outstanding group that happens to have their webinars scheduled on the same nights as this one. So I'll be picking and choosing. So although as much as I really appreciate participation in this group, I'm probably going to have to pick and choose and attend. It cannot be, well, in multi-dimensional world, I should be able to attend both at the same time, but as of right now,
just time travel and duplicate yourself, Michael. Clone yourself. That's what I do.
Yeah,
I clone myself for
need to
everything I
figure
need
that
to.
So the second thing is, I enjoy all these conversations, but I want to just suggest that we go on these less on these general tangents and try to keep the conversations a little bit more rigorous. And I don't mind having theoretical conversations. And but I think if we try to ground it and at least have some level of more rigorousness to it, rather than just going on tangents, because theories abound everywhere about everything.
Yeah.
So just wanted to give you my thought.
No, I appreciate that. This is the most theoretical based conversation we've had in my memory. We are almost always very focused on the practical. You noticed that, I talked about critical thinking skills being the next series of discussions we're going to have. It's going to be very practical, very hands-on, very, we may even do workshops where we practice the skills that we're learning in the workshop if I can have time to, prepare for that. I don't know if I will or not, but, most of what we do is
I'm with you.
practical.
This was this was a good conversation. I clearly read the title, was interested in the subject, but this was at least somewhat more rigorous. But we can talk about aliens, whether they exist or not. So there is so many directions you could go on that. So many theories, really ungrounded. These are nothing more than theories. So there's many, many subjects we could start discussing, but I think it would just be that, theories and ideas on various things. Where did we come from? Are we, lineation of an alien race? Are we not? Without evidence, without rigorousness of discussion, I think we can put our time to better use. That's just my thought.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like I said, this was kind of a filler for not having something last week on the calendar for this week, and we put it on kind of last minute. And quite frankly, next week's is not on the calendar yet, and I need to get the descriptions created so that we can put them on the calendar. But I have about 5 sessions on critical thinking planned out that I kind of gave the roadmap for. So those are going to be the next probably 5 or 6 weeks. So those will be very, very practical, very hands-on. This is, like I said, the rare exception that we go, almost all in on theory. It's generally practical. When we talked about free will, that was also, I think, very theoretical, because most people who don't believe in free will are what I would call free will are soft determinists, and they do believe in free will, where they believe in acting as if we have free will, even though they would argue that determinism is right as well. And so they believe in both determinism and free will, which I don't think is free will, because if determinism is right, there's only one possible future and there's no freedom in that free will. So I would argue that the only concept of free will that makes sense to me, although Hume disagreed, and he's the one that sort of coined the term on compatibilism, and I read his book that did it, and I still disagree with him. I mean, I read a Cliff Notes version of the book on Blinkist, but I think that in order for there to be free will and free will, there's got to freedom to be in free will. There's got to be some ability to make a non-deterministic decision, which is libertarian free will. But anyway, that was another theoretical one, but it was very popular. We kind of grew out of the philosophical community, and so some people really like the philosophical stuff. I tend to like the practical stuff most of the time, but some of my essays are very theoretical, so I cover those too.
All I'm saying is trying to bound the theoretical stuff, not to eliminate it. I think it's very good, but try to bound it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I will try to focus on practical stuff most of the time. Whenever I have a choice, I'll choose a practical application topic. So that said, it is right around 9 o'clock. So I kind of covered what we're going to cover in the next couple of weeks is research, info literacy, evidence evaluation. I'll share the screen again. Let me put the right, okay. So research and information literacy, evidence evaluation, which is deciding which facts out of the things we've researched are credible, and then being able to use formal logic to make really good conclusions, knowing what types of bias we have as human beings and which ones to avoid. We're just going to hit the high points of that. There are a huge number of biases. We can't cover all of them. Same with, well, we're going to cover the types of inference and which ones are more reliable and less reliable and which ones to use when. And we're going to talk about fallacies, which are basically logic that seems sound but is not sound. And then we'll talk about how we can use all that to come up with knowledge of objective reality and then build on that knowledge of objective reality to create wisdom. I see these two as kind of like a bounce back and forth. The more knowledge we have about objective reality, the better we can, act wisely. Because if you have an unsound picture of objective reality, what you think is wisdom will probably be folly. And so we want to have a really clear picture of objective reality. And from that, we can then use our wisdom to make the world a better place, which means preventing significant unnecessary harm for all human beings, and then increasing happiness and decreasing harm wherever we can for everybody we can influence. So that's, go ahead.
This would be a very good parallel neural net feedback to ChatGPT to make it better, more logical, its conclusions more logical.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like hardwiring. No, you're not hardwiring, but rather you're teaching it logic.
Yeah.
And you have to think of how you would want to experiment with that. But I think this would be a good parallel feedback loop into ChatGPT to learn from.
Yep. Cool. Well, thanks everybody for coming tonight. Hope everybody has a great rest of their night and hope to see you guys at future events.
Thank you, Garrett.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for everyone for your comments and thoughtful questions. Bye-bye.
Thank you.